Welcome back to Foster Care, an unparalleled journey with Jason and Amanda Palmer, where our mission is providing strength to the weakest among us, from both kids in foster care and their biological families. We also talk about topics that affect all children and families. It is our hope that we can inspire you to become the best bio, step, foster, adoptive, or whatever kind of mom or dad that you can be. Part of our mission is inspiring others to become amazing foster families as well, if that is your calling. If it's not your calling, great. Find a thing that sets your soul on fire and go be awesome at that. Let's make our communities great together. Be sure to go by Jason M. Palmer and check out the blog post and other podcast episodes. You can search Jason and Amanda Palmer on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, or anywhere else you get your podcast. If we don't show up, be sure to send me an email and let me know, and I will try to get it on there. We'd love to have you leave us some feedback in the form of a rating and review. It really helps the show gain attention. Hi, and welcome back to
Foster Care, an unparalleled journey
with Jason
and Amanda.
We are here today with a guest, Luke Zitzman. Luke has been a foster dad for 4 years. He loves Jesus and has spent the best 7 years of his life married to his awesome wife, Mandy. Luke is a pilot in the Coast Guard and flies the HC-144 Ocean Sentry. Luke and Mandy felt called to foster care, and since moving to their current duty station in 2015, have welcomed over a dozen permanent placement cases into their home, as well as provided emergency and respite care for dozens more children in the foster care system. At the time of this recording, they have 2 teen girls and 2 younger boys in their family. Welcome, Luke.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here. So I see that you fly the Ocean Sentry plane in the Coast Guard, and since I was in the Army, we'll kind of begrudgingly accept the Coast Guard as part of the military, because that's what we do, right?
Yeah, unless the government's shutting down and then we don't get paid, but otherwise we're kind of similar.
As a veteran who was supposed to get paid disability for the rest of my life, who doesn't get paid anything from them because, well, it's the government, shutting down, it just makes me not get money anyways.
Yeah, oh man.
So what's the Ocean Sentry, I'm curious?
It's a twin turboprop airplane, so it's like a C-130, just smaller.
Okay.
It's got like it's a cargo plane, so it has the ramp door that you can, put down on the deck and vehicles can drive into it. And it's just a 2-engine version, so it's much cheaper to operate, for kind of surveillance use, search and rescue and surveillance.
Okay. Yeah. I was MI, so I kind of know the world you're talking about. Yeah. Okay. That's pretty interesting. What made you decide to go in the Coast Guard?
It's a pretty long story. I'd say the short version is, kind of providential. I think that I initially didn't want to go to college at all. My parents said that I didn't have a choice. I was going. I went to look up some more abnormal schools, and I saw the military academy kind of websites with all the helicopters and boats, and thought that it would be crazy. I went there for the civil engineering major, and really, in the end, I think it was just God's providence getting me to the right place at the right time. I ended up realizing while I was there, I didn't like boats at all. And 90% of the cadets from the academy go to a boat. So then the only other alternative was to fly. And that's what I ended up doing. So here I am.
Well, there you go. Yeah, that sounds like an interesting way in, but a way in nonetheless.
Yeah.
How long have you been in the Coast Guard?
May will be 11 years.
11 years. Are you planning on a lifer?
We'll see, but I'm not really sure. I still have, I had 13 years total obligated service, so I'm still paying off my debts. And then, we'll see what happens after that.
I like the non-committal answer. You don't want the re-enlistment officer to hear it and think he's got an easy way to go, right?
Exactly, yeah. And the way the airlines are hiring right now, it's pretty tempting to jump.
I can't say as I would blame you there. It's, from what I understand, a decent career.
Yeah.
But I don't know that you could get me to want to be a commercial airline pilot right now. That doesn't sound like the world I would want to play in. But
right,
I can
can't be too much different than trucking, right?
Well, yes and no. I mean, every time I'm in an airport, I always get searched, though. I don't think even if I was in a pilot's uniform, I think I would still be searched. Something about the ambiguously brown look and the big beard, I always get searched. Even pre 9/11. When I was in the Army, with no beard, just the little military mustache, I still got searched every airport I went into. I learned to hate those places. It was just an extra bunch of stuff I didn't need in my life. But yeah, that was always, I was never a good flyer either though. So there is that.
Yeah.
You know, I can sit in a plane for a while and I'll be calm and I'm not going to cause problems, but I just don't like it. So, I mean, it's got to be a different experience up there in the air when you're the one in the controls.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, that sounds like an exciting time out there, because I've known a couple people who were in the Coast Guard who did some of the stuff they do, and while the rest of the military, we give you guys a lot of crap. You know, the Coast Guard does some pretty cool stuff. I mean, I know that for a fact, but you know, they don't get the credit that the Navy SEALs get. How about that?
Sure. Well, yeah, and those guys are pretty extreme too.
Yeah. I never knew any SEALs, but I knew a handful of Rangers. I knew a Delta operator when I was in and that kind of stuff. And those guys get the press, but, you know, a lot of the real work that's going on out there, we don't hear about goes down there.
Yeah.
So, you know, when I was in the Army, one of the things we had was the Army values. And, you know, let's see if I can make my basic training drill sergeants proud here. Leadership was the acronym they used: loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage. There we go. Yeah. There you go.
Nice.
Drill Sergeant DeCudo. I remember that you beat it into me. But the one in there that sticks out to me is selfless service. You know, that's just a piece of who we become as being in the military. I think it's a piece of I think it's a characteristic trait that draws people into the service. I see that in my wife and I are foster parents now. She's currently walking out of the room with one of the kids who keeps wandering back in. But, you know, I see you guys pulled into foster care as well. Do you think your experience in the military, that characteristic trait kind of is what pulled you guys towards foster care?
I think in some way, I think selfless service is an accurate way to describe it. I would say that, you know, again, in my quick summary of how I got into the Coast Guard, was not I was not motivated by very selfless reasons per se. I was, you know, kind of doing what I felt like I needed to do. And then, you know, I do appreciate that aspect of service, and I do like that we are serving through the Coast Guard. But I think more so what got us into foster care was just an idea of wanting to live intentionally. You know, we saw people around us when we lived at our previous duty station in Miami, Florida. There were people that were in the foster care world, and there was a big adoption ministry at our church. And so my wife and I knew that we wanted to be parents, and we didn't really care how those kids came into the house. And I think after talking with some friends down there, and, you know, and really kind of refining our worldview of like, what, you know, why are we here in this world? You know, what are we supposed to be doing? You know, again, we are Christians and feel called, like you were saying, with the selfless service, that we are to be laying our life down and, you know, taking up our cross and not necessarily just living for pleasure all the time. And so we kind of timidly stepped out into the information gathering stage for foster care. It wasn't, you know, I think my wife was a little more excited than I was at first. But when we moved up to Mobile, we were ready for, we had the paperwork done, ready to start the classes. We were both super on board with giving it a shot at least, you know, and knowing in the back of our minds that if it didn't work out, it was something that you could turn off a little bit easier than, you know, birthing a kid that you then have for 18 or 20 years.
That's very true.
Yeah. So we like the easy out aspect of foster care, you know, when it came to parenting. And since we started, we haven't had any regrets or thoughts of not doing it. You know, it's been definitely a huge challenge, as you all know, but one that's rewarding, and one that you know, there's immediate benefits to, and you know that there will be even more long-term benefits as well.
Oh, I agree. You know, in one of the groups I'm in, the Dad Edge Alliance, one of the things that I hear people talk about a lot there is that legacy. You know, the idea that right now at this very moment you're writing your obituary. You know, whatever you do today is going to leave a wake behind you that's going to change the world long after you're gone. And that's a big piece of my personal drivers and a lot of the things that I do. And it's that notice that you're going to die. someone will carry your casket. That's going to happen. You will have an obituary and a headstone, and you're writing what that obituary looks like today with your actions. And I know that that's a powerful thing for me. And part of that came from my own journey with, my dad was a police officer, and he really mentored a couple guys that I knew. One guy we were friends with, he lived across the street from me when I was little. And they moved away, and years later he came back, and he'd been in some we'll say, he'd made some unfortunate choices in his life. And my dad really mentored him around to a much better place. And another friend of mine whose mom had called the police department and said, you guys come deal with this kid before I abuse him. And my dad happened to be the guy who showed up. And both of those guys are friends of mine now. And it's made such a difference in their life and in their wives' lives and their kids' lives and I'm certain their grandkids' lives. That's how I can see a place where my dad's legacy lives on, even past him now that he's gone. There's a piece of him in that. And I see that as being part of that foster journey. Is there's so much of ourself that we can give to that legacy and pass that on, even if the kids don't stay with us. We've had 4 kids that came to our house as foster kids that we have adopted that will be here forever. But, close to 20 kids all in all that, most of them most of them honestly probably won't remember us because most of them were pretty young. But it doesn't mean that legacy won't live on in 15 or 20 lives down the road that we can't change.
Right.
That's a big piece.
I was going to say too, I think that you have, that when you're talking about legacy and you want to see, and I think one of the difficult things for me is that at first I wanted to really see the immediate benefit that the kid was getting from, the relief from trauma, the safe setting of my household and stuff like that. But really for the first 2 to 3 years of our experience, the kids were kind of in and out like very quickly. And it was difficult to feel like we were making much of a difference in their life. Just because, if you only have a kid for 4 or 8 weeks, it doesn't, you're not going to see that much long-term change in them. And more recently, we've had placements that have lasted much longer, up to 3 years now for one of them. But I do think, like you're saying, I think that God does use even those little clips of, the kids in and out of our house to benefit them in some way, even, 4 weeks away from the trauma in a loving household, can do things for the kid that there will be repercussions later in their life that they will have benefited from that, a little bit of time in a safe household. It's not something that we necessarily get to see or enjoy, but that's one of the tough parts of legacy. It's something that it's for other people. It's not for yourself, Absolutely.
And if anybody listening hasn't heard the story before this one, there should be I think it's a 6-part series called The Legacy of Standing with Turtle. And that is our little guy Turtle, and it tells his story, and his story is deep, man. Like this kid, he would come stay with us because he was kind of a family placement. And I say kind of because there's like a double half step involved in the relationship there. So it's tough to call it exactly a family placement, but
you're still considered a kinship placement. Though,
yeah. So. But he, when you hear his story, where he came from, like it was dark. This kid, he saw the dark side of the world, Well, everybody's familiar with Ferguson, Missouri, right? You've heard of Ferguson, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And where are you from?
I'm from Connecticut originally.
Connecticut, okay. From Connecticut, but you know where Ferguson, Missouri is. And it's about the size of a postage stamp on a map. I'm in Ferguson all the time. Ferguson's actually a nice part of town compared to where Turtle came from. Wow. I know the area. I was actually there just 2 or 3 days ago with my job in the neighborhood he grew up in. And it is like, if you want a place to get shot in St. Louis, that's one of the places. He came out of that neighborhood. And so, he would come to us for a day sometimes it'd be 3 weeks. Sometimes you just never knew. His bio mom would call us and we'd show up and pick him up and we'd have him until we didn't. And
or until she got out of jail the next time. Or,
yep, there was that.
Whatever the case may be.
Yeah, the calls from jail that said, hey, can you watch him for a while because I'm locked up tonight?
I've got 3 other counties I have to be extradited to.
Actually, I think it was 6. 6 counties she had warrants in. And so, it was such an unpredictable thing, but those little moments, you never know what was prevented with him not being there in those moments.
Yeah.
You know, he was literally in the neighborhood that could have been the difference between life and death for him.
Well, the thing is
Yeah.
even one day meant one day in a nice warm house with warm food and, just stability.
So yeah, that's, so even those short-term placements can even be, when you don't see it, you don't get to see it necessarily, but it can mean such a difference in what they experience and what their life is like. So, don't ever discount those placements, because the only thing is you just don't get to know about all the details of what would have been.
Right.
God has a funny way of making us accept that part of life.
Yeah.
So it sounds like religion is a piece of your motivation there. What is that? Is that a big piece of your decision to foster, or was that just an incidental coincidence?
No, it is. I would say the primary reason. I think you hit the nail on the head. I think one thing that we like to talk about is the idea that humans create families biologically. That's the way that people do it. And what we believe the Bible says is that God creates his family through adoption. And so the taking, and I can't quote the verses to you specifically, but the idea of taking a people that was not my people, or God talks about taking a people that was not my people and making them his people, is something that we, get to experience through foster care and adoption. And the choice, making a choice to love a kid is something that we get to exercise that many other people unfortunately don't get to see. I think it's hard to compare, having not had any biological kids, it's hard to compare what that would be like for us. But, I think my wife and I can't really imagine loving kids any less than we love our foster kids. And we do feel like, again, we're called to enter into the brokenness, and, having had, my wife and I have had pretty privileged lives ourselves. We feel that Christ calls us to descend into broken humanity to help redeem it, and not to try to keep ourselves aloof and unstained and avoid the brokenness that's all around us. And one thing that has been interesting for us is, again, having lived pretty easy middle-class lives for our whole life, once you start interacting with DHR and the state and, all the kind of the red tape that goes along with it, you end up in a whole different world, like you were describing with where Turtle came from, neighborhoods you would never be in, people you'd never be talking to, situations that you don't believe are people actually, live in real life. And it really opens your eyes to a lot of ways that our world's not working the way that it should be. And it's easy to want to cover that up, close the wardrobe door and kind of ignore it. But yeah, my wife and I definitely believe that we are called to be a part of the solution there.
I wish I would have had somebody to say all that to me when I was younger, because that's not the religious experience I had growing up. But I think you're 100% right. If you read through that book, which I did several times as a kid, but one of the things that you will find several times in there is a mention of taking care of widows and orphans, who in the time that was written, the widows and orphans were the outcasts of society. They had no way to survive. They were the bottom of the lower class. And my God, if he doesn't say so many times to take care of them, and then you look at the size of the need that's out there, and, it came down to me one day that just said, as much as I was, at that time I was really, and personally I was kind of going through some rebellion against the faith that I had grown up in. And the voice in my head kept asking, but what are you doing? Huh? What do you think you're doing? You want to talk bad about these folks? What are you doing, buddy? Let's see that.
Right.
And it wasn't but a short time later that Amanda and I ended up accidentally almost getting a bunch of paperwork from what was she, the licensing worker at the children's division in our area. I'd gone down there to ask her some questions and interview her about a newspaper article I was writing at the time. And I left with paperwork and brochures, and I came home, and my wife, who would gladly have had 12 kids if we could have physically done it. She saw that, and next thing I know, we're in classes and we were doing it. And I look at it now and I go, this is actually, if you look back, read those Gospels, like, who was sitting in the room? Who was sitting in the room talking with Jesus? It wasn't the people who lived in the nice houses.
Right.
It wasn't the folks who had money.
Yeah.
He was sitting there with prostitutes and thieves and hanging out with their kids and stuff. And that's who was being ministered to. That's who he was helping. And that's one of the things, at least for me, that I look at and go, okay, I'm not going to sit here and lie to you and pretend like I've got all this religion thing figured out, because I sure don't. But if you want to believe in what the Bible says, that's what it says you're supposed to be taking care of, taking care of even the least of these, and kind of the tagline that I have on some of my website stuff is providing strength for the weakest among us. And that's what I see foster care being, as a way to provide that strength for the ones who don't have it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
we were just recently looking at James 1:7. True religion is this, to provide for the widow and the orphan, and to keep oneself unseen from the world. And I think, like I was saying before, we feel called to descend down. To give up power, give up financial power, give up positional power, give up societal power, to be with the widow, the orphan, the immigrant, the oppressed. The sick, the prisoner, all those people that that are powerless in society. Those are the people that we need to be loving. And self-righteousness and hypocrisy and kind of downplaying our own faults doesn't help with any of that.
Absolutely. Usually, one spouse is the driving force behind becoming involved in foster care. Was that really the case for you guys, or was that kind of a joint decision?
I think our case is a little bit different than most with regard to that. We got married I was living in Miami. My wife came down to, moved in with me then. We knew we only had 3 years left in that location, and we kind of agreed to not talk about kids until we moved. And again, during the 3 years that we were there, God was kind of quietly working in our life to expose us to foster care and adoption as an option. I didn't really, because we had agreed to not talk about kids, I didn't really know that my wife was kind of leaning towards the adoption route anyways. And just, I don't think she had really considered foster care or had known what it was at the time. And so she was definitely the instigator at first. When it came time, I was still not super ready to think about having kids, because I was just having, fun. I was having fun, living the lifestyle that we had in Miami. And I wasn't I wasn't anti fostering or adoption per se, but I was just not super ready for kids. But once it came time, once we started doing the classes together, and again, started really buckling down into the intent behind it, kind of like we were discussing before we were recording, is just living a lifestyle of intentionality. That's something that I really appreciate about foster care is there's plenty of kids that need good homes, and we can provide that for them. And we had that there are so many good reasons to welcome in the kids that needed a spot, instead of fill up those spots with new kids that weren't there before. So I really like the intentionality behind it. But I would say, to answer your question a little more concisely, my wife did kind of start the research into it and planted the seed, and we were both on board, for the process. Okay.
Now, do you guys have any biological kids of your own?
We do not.
Yeah. Was that an intentional choice, or is that a fertility issue?
So far it's been an intentional choice. We're not really sure if we could have kids or not, but we've been actively trying not to.
Well, I ask because that's a big thing with infertility issues. I think I've known some people who came into it because of that. So that's why I was just curious if you guys had that as an issue, or if it was just the personal choice.
No, yeah, we were I would say much more excited with the thought of loving the kids that were already there, instead of just an kind of unknown kid that would pop into our life.
And you'll learn just as much and experience just as much love. I've had a lot of people tell me, and I'm certain if you've been doing foster care more than about 5 minutes, you've heard all the platitudes. There's a special place in heaven, and the one
Right.
that, that there's, it takes a special man to love somebody else's child. And I've heard that a lot. And I think, not really.
Yeah.
It doesn't really take that much. Like if you were walking through the mall and there was a 2-year-old standing there crying in obvious pain or, afraid, and there's no other human around, would you not walk over and be like, "Hey buddy, what's going on?
Yeah.
Do you need some?"
Right.
I mean, it's not that hard to see a kid in pain and step out and try to help them.
Yeah.
Now, I will give you mad props because it's obvious that you guys have chosen to help older kids. And where I've known, we have one lady who's out here in our county who has specialized in teens and helping teens transition out of care and off into their own life. And she has really, I look at people like that, and I'm sorry, but I'm always in awe of that. That's a skill set that is foreign to me. Our oldest daughter would have been 23 this year. We have a 21-year-old and a 19-year-old and a 14-year-old and a 12-year-old. And teens are just not my forte.
Yeah.
I love Matchbox cars and the little town, the rugs that's got the town on it. And we get down on the ground and we've room cars from the police station over to the park, and then we go eat lunch. And that piece of loving a kid is super easy.
Right.
The teen route is a bit more challenging because there's so much more involved. The teen life is hard. I mean, middle school, my God. I mean, how much money would you have to experience middle school again?
Oh, I never want to do it. Never.
That's a tough time in life. And kids in care who are going through that, they've got it doubly tough. It's a lot of extra strength, not strength. It's a lot of extra stress on them. And so I can only imagine what that's like for a kid going through that. But as a parent, I don't know that's a place that I feel like I could step into and do it well as a foster parent. So. Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying the interview with Luke Zitzman today. If you'd like to find more information on foster care and adoption, come by and check us out at our Facebook page, Foster Care: An Unparalleled Journey. You can also find us on YouTube by the same name, or you can come by and look at our website and the blog at jasonmpalmer.com. It's all together, Jason M, as in Martin, jasonmpalmer.com. And we hope to see you over there. Now back to the show. Mad props to you guys for being able to see that as a place that you can make a difference, because that's definitely the harder route.
Yeah, thanks. And we're not that good at it either. We're definitely learning as we go. I think my wife is more, and she's was a middle and high school science teacher, so she likes the middle to the high school age range, and she's very good at, she's much more emotionally intelligent than I am, so she's good at meeting the kids where they're at there, and I'm better at tumbling around, wrestling with the boys on the floor, and doing the younger kids for sure. But I think to go back to the earlier question too about not having biological kids, it's actually been to our benefit that we did not have kids in our house. So we were able to accept a much wider age range initially, and we also have the incredible luxury of my wife staying at home. And I think the stats are there's something like 150 foster homes in our county for about 600 kids. And of the 150 homes, we're one of 4 or 5 that has a stay-at-home spouse. And so in the early days, we got several placements where they called us and said, "Hey, you're on a very short list of people that are able to take this kid because of this condition that needs constant care through the day." Or this, one of the kids that we have right now had been kicked out of 7 daycares, and that wasn't an option anymore. He had to stay home with a caretaker. So, just having the 2 of us and no other kids in the house has enabled us to more effectively minister just to some of these kids.
And what a blessing you get to be able to provide that for them and to experience it, because as a foster parent, I know the truth is that I get more out of it. I learn more. I have more amazing moments with kids than I would ever have been able to have, if I wasn't in a few of those harder places with them. I've learned so much from those kids. That's got to be a blessing for you guys to be able to step in for some of those kids who really need some intensive, caretaker.
Yeah, definitely. And the teens definitely do stretch you more, but it's good because it makes you really reassess your priorities, your worldview, your beliefs, and it's that the growth comes with a challenge, and you don't, if you're not challenging yourself with the parenting that you're experiencing, if you're just sitting on the couch playing on your iPhone while the kids tumble around in the yard, you're not going to grow from that. But if you're really, hitting the relational difficulties head on and trying to mentor, trying to teach, that's where a lot of the growth comes. And that's what, my wife and I have experienced.
Well, that's a great way to look at it, because you're right. All growth comes through pain. Nobody gets stronger unless you pick up a heavier weight. If you're not sore after your workout, you're not going to get more muscles. If you don't breathe hard, you're not going to get any cardiovascular effort out of it. You're not going to make any gains. It goes all the way down to the very basics. All growth comes through struggle. So seeing those challenges as an opportunity is an important piece of being a human, I think. Not even just a foster parent, but it's an important piece of being a human, so that you know how to see hard times and learn to grow from those.
Yeah.
That's one of the things we learned. What it's been 4 years ago, we lost our oldest daughter, and where that sounds like a horrible thing, and it is. I mean, I'm not going to lie. Nobody would ever choose that route, but unless you have the ability to see the opportunities in the pain, like, your world changes. At that point, I understand why people become alcoholics and drug addicts, just to numb the pain, because that's a lot of pain. Now, I'm not even going to lie. I became an alcoholic for a while after that, I only had one drink every night, but it was a fifth of whiskey. That was my single drink. And I did that for a while, not because I was smart, but because I didn't have the emotional intelligence to walk through that stuff. I didn't know what I was dealing with, and that's one hell of a deep end to jump into. And it wasn't until I got to the point where I knew something had to change that my life became something different. That I realized that, at this point, I am not a good dad at the end of the day. I'm not a good husband. I stay up till I get the kids put to bed, and I drink to numb the pain, and then I go pass out in bed and get up early the next morning and do it again. You do that 5 days a week, and on the weekends you just have a drink in the morning so that it numbs the hangover pain. And it was a cycle that came out of not being able to find those opportunities in the pain. And what you said there, that's a big thing, that teaching a lot of these kids who come out of pain, that's an opportunity for you to teach them some things that they're not going to get other places. Usually, and I know, I don't know what the stats are. I know at least 2 of the kids in our house, that they came through the foster care system, and their mom was a foster kid at one point as well. It's that generational problem. Nobody has spoken into that family in a way that has changed the generations. And that's a position you have to be able to help kids see that and change what their life story is going to be and the story of their future generations.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
So how have your foster experiences shaped the heart of your family?
I think when we initially stepped into it, obviously, like any new foster family, we had no idea what we were getting into. We knew it'd be hard, and you get the veteran foster parents that kind of like laugh at your naivety, and they're like, "Oh, you wait, it'll be terrible," and you just hear horror stories, but you haven't experienced it yet. But I think getting into it and seeing a few of those horror stories and then realizing that it's worth it has really convinced my wife and I that the benefits of not living for ourselves. We look at what we could have been had we, and not to not to put anyone down that lives this lifestyle, but had we, gone out and bought the nicest house we could afford and had the 2.3 kids and the white picket fence and, the new car, kind of live the American dream, I don't think that we would be as satisfied as we are living, a life of intentional sacrifice. And I think we find meaning and satisfaction in the calling of serving others. And right for now, that's these kids that need a safe place to live. And I think that I think the heart of our family, and I'm speaking for my wife and myself right now, but our heart right now is that we live that life of service, sacrificial service. And this experience, the last 4 years of foster care, have shown how rewarding that could be, even amidst the difficulty. As we were talking about, like the growth from the pain, we're starting to see the character growth that's happened because of the choices that we've made.
Wow, that intentional sacrifice piece, that's I'm certain that has roots in your religious beliefs as well. That's one of those things that and the understanding that you're finding meaning in the midst of the suffering. That's almost a Buddhist principle there. I think I've heard it put that life is suffering punctuated by brief moments of happiness, so you damn well better find some meaning in all of it. And it sounds like that's what you guys are doing. Yeah.
Yeah. And we think, and our belief would be that God is weaving an intricate tapestry of life all throughout everything, that he's working all things for the good of those that are called according to his purpose, and really eventually all things for his glory. And so, when I think people are preoccupied with kind of the mythical or legendary stories, like Lord of the Rings or the Star Wars stuff, or C.S. Lewis and the Chronicles of Narnia. And the reason that stuff resonates with us is because we were meant to be part of that kind of story. And when we encounter all of these foster kids, we're catching them on parts of the lowest parts of their life, and we're getting to live through a little bit of their story. And we believe that all that is being woven together into, a great and glorious story that'll have a incredibly happy ending. And so we're looking forward to that. So while there is pain along the way, you don't get, when you watch a movie, you don't get the satisfaction out of a happy ending if there's no crisis during the movie, and likewise, you don't see growth in someone's character, and one of these kids' character, unless they came from, somewhere where they had no character or needed to grow from. You don't get the joy of happy living if you've never felt the pain of, the loss or the situations that a lot of these kids are coming out of. And so, it's definitely something, not that I'm not saying that the good always outweighs the bad every day or every week or month. But we do have a great hope that we can look forward to. And we think that we're, making an eternal difference in a lot of their lives.
Wow. I think you're right. But that's quite a reason to stay after it.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you and I both know, we've said it many, many of times, we have learned and gained more from our children than I think we could ever possibly hope to give them. Every story, every case may be different. It may have different challenges, but, it stamps on our heart in a different place each time, and we learn a new lesson each and every time. And it's just, as much as people say we're doing for them, they're doing just as much, if not more, for us, and making us better people for it.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I would say that for every struggle I've helped a young kid through, I have gained more than they have. And that's been one of the driving forces for me, is that I've grown so much in the middle of this process. You're talking earlier about, seeing kids come from places that you only see in movies, the downtrodden side of, the other side of the tracks or North St. Louis City. you know, all the different pieces of town that we sometimes forget a lot of times just how good we have it. You know, because even the kids who come from those areas have it better than most of the children in third world countries. And that piece of learning gratitude and learning to accept that gratitude as part of who we are, and change ourselves into a person of gratitude, so that it's a little bit harder to stay inside of the negative side of our own head, because you know how fortunate you are. Yeah.
And by extension too, I think my wife and I would say, you know, what we believe is that she and I are you know, deeply flawed individuals, that we sin, and we don't deserve anything good, essentially, and it's only through God's grace, you know, taking away the sin that we've had and given us His perfect record that we get to share in His joy, and then the outpouring of that, the unmerited favor is to turn and lay down our lives in service of Him, and this is one exciting way, one easy way, one necessary way that we're able to do that.
One of the other questions I always like to ask people is, what sets your soul on fire?
I think I may have kind of gotten into this a little bit earlier, but little bits of it, you know, through there. But what I was just saying about God's unmerited favor towards us, and kind of our response to that, you know, that the idea, you know, and we would call it the gospel, is that we sin and fall short of the standard being perfection. And since I'm not perfect, I don't deserve to be in God's presence in His perfection, but that He reached down, that He adopted me into His family, that He paid the price for my sins, that He washed them away and gave me a perfect record. That gets me really excited to live in a way that points back to that, that glorifies the God that loves that much. And any way, you know, like we were talking about through Scripture, when He points us to serve the least of these, that's essentially what He was doing. He was, when He saved me and adopted me into His family, He was saving someone that was powerless to do that on my own. And then so seeing in a small way, being able to reflect that same narrative by reaching out, you know, saying yes when DHR calls and welcoming a new kid into our home. That new kid is powerless and can't earn our favor, and that, you know, that's a part of maybe a little part of Zoe's story that she may get into on your next episode. But just the idea of the kid not being able to work their own salvation, but you're just extending grace and love and provision towards them. It's just so exciting to see. And unfortunately, I kind of breeze past that in actual experience. I don't let that reality sink in, and I'm just kind of task oriented, like just running down the checklist of the next things that have to happen, and trying to reinforce my vision of what the kid's future should be, and do my best to spin the dials and control what I can. But I think it would behoove me and probably a lot of other people to just step back and see that narrative playing out, of unmerited favor, kind of paying it forward. What the grace that you've received, that you're turning around, passing that on to the people that you're interacting with in your daily life.
Wow, I think that must be a male trait to some extent, but you kind of sound like a pilot with checklists and control.
Yeah.
Yep. But that's so true in all of our, I think that's part of the male mentality in large part. We're big on that control, being able to make sure we have everything planned out and laid out ahead of us, and all the boxes are checked. Everything's good to go before we take off on whatever journey it is, and get up into the middle of the air, because we're afraid that if something comes apart, well, it's not like when your car engine dies, right?
Right, exactly, yeah.
Your car stops going, it kind of sucks. But when your plane motor stops going, it's catastrophic. Yeah. And sometimes we forget to step back and just watch the view. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a big piece of it for most of us guys, I think. One of the things that we found ourselves really talking about with a lot of people is trauma. Trauma is such a big piece of our lives and every kid's life, especially who comes into care, because trauma has so many effects that we're just now understanding the science of. There's a lot of research out there now that shows that you can do an MRI and see the physiological damage that trauma has in the brain of a human being. Their brain changes when they go through trauma. And that's one of the things that has informed our parenting style a lot. Not every day, because trauma-based parenting is great when you can remember to do it in the moment, but every parent fails at it sometimes. But where would you say you've seen trauma in your life that has really affected you, and how has that helped you to grow?
Well, that's a totally different question than I expected you were going to go on that route. I don't know. I don't know if you're talking about trauma that's impacted me personally, right?
Well, I mean, and some of the stuff that we've learned the most from has been some of the kids' trauma that we've dealt with as well. So,
I see. Yeah. Okay.
Every piece of that.
I thought you were referring to me specifically, because I was going to say, man, I felt like I have a pretty easy childhood, but there's definitely been, it's much easier to point out trauma that you see in other people, I think. So I don't think that I have experienced much, if any, but I could easily point to every kid that we've had in our house and see huge like habit patterns all the way down to little tics that they have that, are indicative of the trauma they've experienced. One resource that helped us out a lot in our early days of foster parenting was TBRI, the Trauma-Based Relational Intervention kind of school of thought out of TCU, the Dr. Karen Purvis Institute down there, and some of the exercises that she would use. A lot of the ways that we had to respond, especially to some of the younger kids, were completely counterintuitive. Nothing like the direct parenting that we got from our parents growing up. The other thing that I think that you'd appreciate, as is a lot of times, often what those kids need when they're acting up is just like a snuggle and a hug kind of thing, just wrestling them to the ground and hugging them till the crying stops, which is sometimes not my first reaction when there's misbehavior going on. But I think, like you said before, it is so important to recognize the acting out is coming from trauma and not necessarily ADD or, some kind of just mischievous behavior that we would suspect them of. But there's a deeper scar that needs to be addressed before some of the surface level behavior is penalized.
Yeah, that's the interesting piece of trauma, is that the counterintuitive responses are difficult at best.
Yeah.
When I have a 4-year-old who's throwing, I don't know, something heavy at a window, and because they're angry, and you ask them, why'd you do that? And their answer is, because I'm mad. Your first response is not to go ahead and look for the pain in there. And your first response is to go, you almost broke my window. What's wrong with you, child?
Right.
So yeah, that's a tough one to get a hold on. How have you learned to work through that response and the when they're having one of those emotional responses?
Boy, I think that I'm very weak at that. I have not learned very well at all. I think the only comforting thing that I've seen is with one of ours, the 5-year-old that we have right now. He can tell through the counseling that we've gotten for him to recognize when I'm getting upset at maybe something he did or his brother did. And to see him coaching me through, Dad, do some breathing, take a deep breath, coaching me through some of the exercises that we've taught to him to handle anger. And I think that the comical nature of that kind of situation where I'm about to blow up on maybe him and he's coaching me through my anger response has been super helpful. I think that another technique that I use to combat that is knowing, again, I most of the times that I make mistakes in my life are when I'm really hurried and not not handling transitions well. And I think that's something that's, very common to trauma, or people affected by trauma. And so in my own life, trying to reduce the stress of transitions by making the transition time longer, waking up a little bit earlier so we're not rushing as much to get out to school and do the drop-offs, or taking a long way home on my commute so that I can, take a minute to kind of process the day and everything that happened at work. So I'm not walking into a messy house at the end of a work day, still stressed about work and now very frustrated at the state of the house. Little things like that to kind of compartmentalize some of the stressors has helped me.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around my 5-year-old trying to calm me down.
Yeah, it's pretty funny.
But I mean, that's amazing that he's at a place at 5 where he can see that, recognize it, and step into that place. That's because that's going to serve him in the future to know how to do that for himself.
Yeah. Yep. Definitely.
I guess the only other question I had right now is, is there a story that you really feel like you need to tell?
I wouldn't say a story per se, but I think the one thing that I try to communicate to each of the kids that I think is helpful for anyone is just the idea of living with intentionality, being purposeful in the things that we do and the actions that we take, the activities that we participate in, the things that we own. Every decision in life, I think, needs to be made with intentionality. And the best analogy I've heard for that is life as a conveyor belt, where your current self is throwing packages on to the conveyor belt that your future self is going to have to unload. And your future self is really going to want to be unloading good financial decisions and healthy eating and good exercise habits and healthy relationships. And it's really tempting for your current self to be throwing on cheeseburgers and, spending money, going into debt, not working out, and boxes full of crap. And so just that idea of like things that are good for you now might not be good for you later is something I really try to impress on the kids. And I think it can be very helpful for us as adults too, to kind of weigh that in our own life. Like what are we doing for ourselves now that's going to make our future self happy? And I think that participating in foster care is a huge benefit to me and my wife. And it's not just doing something that'll be good for us later through the character growth and kind of the living experiment of getting to see what sacrificial living is like, but it's also good for other people later that we're jumping into this and making the intentional decision to have an atypical family. And so I would just encourage all your listeners of all ages to be looking at life and the decisions they're making, and think about that conveyor belt. Are the actions that you're taking now going to give you the results that you want in the future?
I had pizza for lunch, right?
No, I didn't know that. It's one of my favorite foods, though. So
yeah.
Everything in moderation, right?
There you go. Moderation is not my strong suit. There's a reason why today I drink 0 glasses of alcohol per week.
Yeah.
But yeah, because you're right. That's what I learned through that experience of mine was that, those things that I was throwing on turned out I had to pay for it in a lot of different ways. Not only the health and the mental aspects of that, but I have several risk factors in my life, and stroke's a real thing. It's all through my mom's side of the family, and as stroke victims go, I speak better than most.
Wow.
I've had 6. And
wow.
Yeah, that's what I said, especially when I went to the doctor, when he told me the first time that he told me I'd had 3 and didn't know about it. And then I found out I had 3 more, and I had a heart condition that they have hopefully fixed. We haven't had any issues since then. So I'm incredibly fortunate there. But
knock on wood.
Yeah, she's over here knocking on the desk. Yeah, ain't no lie, because it's a real deal, and those poor decisions come back in spades when they show back up. So,
right.
Yeah. Well, that's a good word.
Thanks for the chance to talk.
All right. Well, hey, we appreciate you guys coming on here today. Coming on and talking to us and sharing your story. Thanks to everyone for listening all the way through. If you're trying to find us on a specific podcasting platform, just search for Jason and Amanda Palmer or Foster Care, An Unparalleled Journey, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast. Leave us a rating and review on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, or anywhere where you find your podcast. You can also download it so that you can listen wherever you're at, even when you aren't online. You can find us online at jasonmpalmer.com, where you can read our blog and listen to all of our previous podcasts. If you have a story that you'd like to tell on the show, please send me an email at jasonmpalmer@yahoo.com, and be sure to put podcast in the subject line. Or send me a message through our Facebook page at Foster Care, An Unparalleled Journey. We'll see you next time.